And that strong scientism holds that only knowledge or rationality justified beliefs we can have about reality are those that have been certified by, and especially, the hard sciences. So again, we're talking about kind of two different types of people that hold to scientism. One that says that, nope, only the certified hard sciences are the only things that can give you truth that you can bank on. And everything else is shifted off to the side. The soft ones will come along and say, well, there might be a few extra toppings that you can throw on your ice cream if you want. But here he's distinguishing and saying that the strong scientism holders are those that say only the hard sciences will give you kind of that justified truth. He says that he believes that strong scientism is self-refuting. It is self-referentially incoherent, meaning that it refutes or defeats itself, and he's going to define that charge before he defends it. And of course, there's no way to kind of titrate this, scratch test this, to, break it apart into its elements. And so we are going to be dealing with philosophy, but to be fair, they did it first. So that's where we're going here.
Yeah, okay, so self-refuting. Scientism is self-refuting. That's the claim of this chapter, right? And this idea that the only knowledge that we can have is from science, right? That's the basic idea. So how's it self-refuting? Well, before we get there, let's talk about what makes a statement self-refuting. That's where he goes to next, right? So he wants to make sure that we're clear what he means by self-refuting. So he says, these kinds of statements, self-refuting statements, have three features, he tells us. First, the claim establishes some requirement of acceptability for an assertion, such as having to be empirically verified or something like that. So there's a requirement that the assertion has to make in order to be acceptable. Right? That's the basic idea. So that's the first thing. And then secondly, the claim places, notice this, itself in subjection to the requirement. So the claim is part, or at least under the subjection of the requirement, right? The claim has to be evaluated with regard to the same requirement as every other claim, right? That's the basic idea. So we have a standard, right? And a requirement of acceptability. The claim falls under that requirement. And then thirdly, then the claim falls short. And here's the problem, right? The claim falls short of satisfying the requirement of acceptability that the assertion itself stipulates. So you make a claim, you say this is the standard that something has to meet, and this claim falls within that particular area, but that particular claim fails to meet the standard that it's set for claims. So in other words, when a statement is included in its own subject matter, like when it refers to itself, thus self-referential, right, but fails to satisfy its own standards of acceptability. That's the idea of self-refuting, right? So he wants us to be clear on what he's talking about with regard to self-refuting statements.
Yeah. And here's where you get all the fun examples, the classic one that's probably already going out of the purview of conversation is there are no absolute truths. Are you absolutely sure? Or we can reach back even to biblical times or before biblical times. And I was reading Titus, and Paul quotes, that all Cretians are liars. And that comes from Epimenides, who himself is a Cretan, a person from Crete. So if a Cretan tells you that all men are liars and he's a Cretan, well, therefore he's lying, right? Or is he telling the truth? Yeah. So there you get the liar's paradox as well. And
there
so
you go. Right. Yeah.
You stick it into a Muppets Jim Henson movie, and you make $1 million.
You make a lot of money.
Exactly. All right. Well, so we've defined our terms again. Always a great thing to do. And he goes on to say that self-refuting statements can come in many forms. And so he gives us a further example. So all sentences are exactly 3 words long. And of course, that sentence is not 3 words long, but it is a sentence. So it is self-refuting. It puts itself under, it makes a claim, right? And so there you have all 3 aspects. Another one, I cannot utter a word of English, spoken in English. You get this in your cheap 80s comedies, no habla inglés, but you were just talking English. It's like, no, I wasn't. Yes, you were. So the back and forth there. The claim that I do not exist, Descartes would blow his gasket over that claim. This sentence is false. Again, that liar's paradox. And again, all 3 conditions are met here. Truths can only be verified by 5 senses or by science. if we look closely at these sentences, we'll
So
see
that one
how
is
each
really close.
satisfies.
Yeah, that
Right.
one's really close to it, right? In
Right.
fact,
Yeah. So we,
you
we
nailed
sniff this sentence, we sniff this truth, and it's true. So, or we can lick it. The snozberries taste like snozberries, or by science. So
it.
we can do all the things of science, and that's the only way we get the truth. So we'll see how each satisfies the criteria of being self-refuting.
Right. So he wants us to be clear here. And so he says that some statements like 6 plus 3 equals 17, right, could not possibly be true. Right. He says, this is a necessary falsehood. So even God, he says, could not make 6 plus 3 17 true. Right. He says other statements like there are no cats only happen to be false, right? They just happen to be false, but
Mm-hmm.
these could have been true. So they're, contingent, right? And so those are not self-refuting. Notice he tells us that here the key to remember is that self-refuting statements do not just happen to be false. Instead, they are necessarily false. They must be false, right? And so no amount of future research will show that these statements are true after all. And so he wants to prevent, the scientists from saying, well, if we could just get enough research, or eventually we'll be able to show that, right? He
Right.
says, no, they're necessarily false. All right.
Right. So yeah, the kind of the example of, if it's raining outside, then the grass will be wet. You go outside and the grass is wet, and then you go, therefore it was raining. Although the sprinklers had been turned on previously. So is it self-refuting? No, but it was wrong. Could it have been otherwise? Could it have been raining at some point in time? Well, yes, and therefore it doesn't make this could not possibly be true. But the fact that the ground is wet, and there are the answer to that question is within range of possibilities. Some of them can be true or false. 6 plus 3 equals 17, which again should be 9. It can't be anything but 9. Out of all the possible numbers in the entire world, you just happen to pick the one right one. And so yes, that happens to be the case. And so it can't be anything but that. So those are kind of the two ideas. And again, we kind of throw out these claims a lot of times. The person who's heard some of these charges, well, that's self-refuting, that's contradictory. Well, you're using terminology, but you're using it in a different claimant category, more of a popularist. You're just wrong, and I'm trying to sound a little bit more smart in this.